Okay, so Bershutchem will we're moving with Halakhah. We decided to split up the Shiurim Halakhah and Hashkafa like we did last summer because we need a little bit of both and we can't do only one or the other. So, B'ezrat Hashem, we have a one-stop shop. Very interesting question, especially poignant here in New York City, where we live like rats in relatively everybody but our generous host, the beautiful apartment. But some of us live in apartments that don't have enough room for 2 sinks and 2 ovens and 2 microwaves and what have you, 2 washing machines, the dishwasher says. So it's a question that we're asked often enough: is what is the status of the microwave or the oven? Is it permissible to use it for either one use or the other, for milk or for meat or for both? The fascinating thing is that this is a very long-standing machloket that wasn't really resolved. I'll explain to you the ins and the outs of it and how we hold Halakhah Maaseh. Yeah.
But Rabbi Avidan Elkin, I had a siddur that had the halachot from Kol Yisrael. In the back, he actually gave all the halachot about everything, about the dishwasher, about everything.
So how does he hold by ovens?
Ovens? I think he said you could. I know the dishwasher you could definitely use for both, but you had to do a cycle in between but never mix the dishes. The oven, I don't remember anymore, but he was very specific about everything.
Yeah, it's a very complicated discussion on that. He may have brought a certain conclusion. Here's another thing about Piskei Halakhah in general, specifically about Rabbi Yosef. He had an inhuman memory. It's just unbelievable the things he remembers. In fact, this was of Yitzchak Yosef's son. I think it was his oldest son, was traveling with him once, and on the plane, he didn't let his father learn. He just asked him all these questions. Abba, what's the halacha here? What's the din there? Who holds this way? What's the opinion? So he said that he ran off a bunch of questions because he didn't have that much time to sit and talk to him like this, and so he ran off a bunch of questions. And one of the questions he asked him something called Kashrut. So he asked him what was the source for this particular halacha. He says to him it's the Rashba, Rabbi Shmuel ben Aderet, and it's his opinion. He wrote a teshuvah. He wrote a halachic response in Siman, Tav Mem Vav, something like this. And so he decides this was a question that bothered him. He looks it up, and he finds that it wasn't in Tav Mem Vav, it was in Tav Mem Chet. This is the first time in his life that his father actually quoted something that wasn't, not only accurate to the page, but also where on the page it was. So he says to him, he says, Abba, remember the Rashba that you quoted? It wasn't the Siman that you told me, 2 Simanim later. So he says to him, we were flying, I was on the plane, Lo B'Shamayim hi. It's like, the Torah is very hard to quote accurately when you're flying. Your mind is not the Torah is hard to find up there. He says to him, okay, so this was the only time in his life he remembered that his father quoted something and he was like off by a few pages. It's an amazing memory. So you look at this Piskei Halakhah and you'll find that the conclusions are very short. The discussions are enormous. Enormous. He will bring all the opinions that were ever written on the topic. He'll stack them up. Here are those who are in favor, here are those who are against, here are those who are lenient, here are those who are strict. Here's a different way of looking at this, here's who said this, who said that, for pages and pages and pages. And the conclusion he gives you at the end. Ravali Mansour gives you his conclusions. Because the daily halachot, so he gives you, some say like this, some say like that, here's the conclusion. And you look at the audio file, it's a minute 46 seconds, a minute 32. Okay, these discussions are long, very, very, very long. And there's a reason for this. Not everybody's ready or able to digest them, but when you get into the details, sometimes you find that there are very legitimate opinions that say you shouldn't do this, even if we hold against them that you can. Or there are opinions that say that you should do this, even if there's a minority of opinions that says that you shouldn't. Sometimes you want to be careful for more than one opinion, sometimes you don't care, you have to choose between one or the other. So it's not so simple as black and white, yes, no, etc. It gets complicated. Halakhah gets very, very complicated sometimes. So I could give you a list of halachic conclusions. I don't think you'd be very well served by that. I think sometimes getting into the details of the discussion, you learn other things on the way, and it gives us a better perspective maybe on we learn some of the rules and we can apply them to other situations, etc. So we have this concept of cooking, and wherever anything involves cooking, if there's something permissible and something forbidden that are involved, there's the potential that taste will be transferred from one item to the other. Simple as that. Kol ha'isurim shebatorah benoten ta'am. The Torah tells you something is asur to eat. What does it mean? It means it's asur to taste. Question I was asked three times in the past year. Different students in different places wanted to know if it's permissible for them to go to a non-kosher cooking school. In other words, to a good cooking school. And I'm just kidding. Kosher food is delicious and it's well worth the money. We got that. So they wanted to go to a culinary school where they teach you real concepts and principles in cooking and cooking good food, etc. And they wanted to know if it's okay for them to go to a school that's going to require them as part of their course requirements, part of their course of study, to taste non-kosher foods or to taste non-kosher wines. So if one of my colleagues has to cook something with pork in it, actually I should say non-kosher beef. Use pork because everybody knows pork is not kosher. Like non-kosher beef is just as bad. Probably even worse because there's no chelev in pork. Non-kosher beef, they might have ground the beef with chelev, and this is a sort of karet. Pork, it's only malkot. It's not that you should do it, but it's probably worse to eat non-kosher beef. So this is our classic example would be non-kosher beef. So someone cooked something with non-kosher beef, let's say the filet mignon, without taking off the chelev. So this is a very severe interdiction. Tremendous isur. If I need to taste this in order to compare my sense of taste to that of the rest of the students in the class, so part of being a chef is not just knowing how to cook, it's knowing how to taste. In fact, it's probably more important that you know how to taste than you know how to cook, because this way you'll be able to give productive feedback, to critique recipes, to perfect them, compare and contrast different ingredients. You're not always going to have the same wine, the same spices, the same herbs, fresh, dried, etc. So the answer is no. No, you cannot taste this food even if you're not going to swallow it. Why? We have this concept in Halakhah, Kol ha'isurim benoten ta'am. Everything that's asur in the Torah, what's asur is the taste. In theory, if I were to eat something that was totally desiccated, pulverized, it had lost its original shape and form, no longer tastes like it used to taste, then maybe if it's not asur at all, and if it is, probably not midoraita. As a matter of fact, we had this discussion last year. We were talking about the concept of gelatin. Gelatin, which, by the way, by scientific definition, has no taste. There's no taste to gelatin. It's kind of like kosher airplane food. Have you got one more comment like that? I don't have to ask you. So, what happens if someone took gelatin from a non-kosher animal, let's say a cow that wasn't killed by a shephet, and they reduced the bones, etc., in order to get this to collapse the collagen into gelatin, and the gelatin was thoroughly desiccated. It was completely dried and then pulverized, and they sell it in powder form. Sometimes they sell it as little transparent, like plastic flakes they use for pastry, etc. So because it has no taste, because it was destroyed, it no longer has its original form, its original shape, it was isolated, they added compounds to it that made it inedible, and they removed those compounds, calcium carbonate, a few others. So because it no longer has the taste of non-kosher meat or non-kosher bones or non-kosher stock, it's by definition no longer asur. So I can take something non-kosher that no longer has a taste, or the taste was destroyed, and it's no longer non-kosher. It's not the fact that I'm eating something that was made from a non-kosher cow or from a pork derivative, etc. The real identifying characteristic of something non-kosher is its taste. If I can taste the non-kosher item, it's asur. If I can't taste it, it's mutar. Here's another classic example of the same concept. What happens if I have two pieces of kosher beef, one piece of non-kosher beef? They are practically identical, except one of them is much less expensive. When I throw them into a pot and I cook them, in theory, I'm not recommending you should do this. Someone's going to go home after the shiur and post on Facebook, what Rabbi Elkin said. No, I'm not suggesting you should do this. But if you were possessed and you decided to give it a try, two pieces of kosher meat, and one piece of kosher meat, and it's batel b'rov. Why? Because there is no taste. There's no identifiable, easily distinguishable taste between the two. Not true of cheese and meat, where I can taste both of them. If it were three pieces of the same kind and of the same species, but two are kosher, one is not, because the majority of what contributes taste to the pot is kosher and the minority is not, in theory, I would have a halakhically permissible situation.
So
Only because it can't be tasted. So min b'mino, if it's one item in the same item, so 2 pieces kosher beef to 1 piece non-kosher beef, and in theory, just because there's no significant change in taste, I can't taste what's asur from what's mutar, it would be permissible. If it's min b'sheino mino, that's when I have this concept of 1 to 60. So 1 out of 61 or 1 to 60. So if it's cheese and meat, unless I can taste the difference, Chazal assumed that when you have 1 piece of cheese, 60 pieces of meat of the same volume, of the same size, it's okay. It's okay unless you can taste it. Because if you can taste it, 1 to 1,000 is not going to help you. Everything depends on taste. If you can taste it, it's asur. Make it nice and simple. You can taste it, it's asur.
I'm confused. I thought we're not supposed to eat non-kosher meat if it wasn't chef right because it was cruel to the animal. That's the whole point of not. No?
I don't know that it's kind to the animal to cut its throat with a sharp knife. I do this all the time, more for fun than for profit. You know, is it nice? Is it like, would you do this to someone that you like? Maybe some people.
But I thought there was something spiritual about it.
There is nothing to do with cruelty or non-cruelty. In other words, if the Goyim were to invent a way that's theoretically less cruel, that wouldn't make it more kosher or less kosher. We do it this way because the Torah says do it this way. It's nice to minimize any suffering to the extent that you can. That's not to say we're not going to do shechita or we're going to kill it some other way. If electrocuting it or if piercing the skull with a bolt, then we do this. If that were considered to be less cruel by the Goyim, I don't know that it is, but if that's what they claim, it wouldn't change the way I do shechita. But that's beside the point. When it comes to these isurim, we hear these calculations of 1 out of 60. We hear such nice and simple. If nothing else you learn tonight, the Satan is not a person, and anything you can taste is asur if it's not kosher. It doesn't matter if it's 1 in 2, 1 in 20, 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million. If you can taste it, it's asur. Yeah.
So we could eat any candy, any cake, anything, absolutely that is not certified as kosher then. Because we don't taste any meat, we don't taste any wine, we don't taste anything that's not kosher in it. So,
if you could ascertain, if you could verify that there is nothing non-kosher in the product, then it's kosher. Just like that. There is no such thing as non-kosher salt, for example. They call kosher salt because they used to use it to make meat kosher.
Yeah.
Okay, but the only thing is non-kosher salt. There are items that may have no non-kosher ingredients. I can't tell you 100% that none of these flavorings is non-kosher. There are certain flavorings that are. So for the easiest example would be the flavorings they make out of grape. Also a discussion, but let's assume it's not kosher.
Food coloring too.
Food coloring, it depends what the source
The
is.
shells of insects.
Believe it or not, yeah, they make some really interesting
With
dyes.
beetles,
And
yeah.
They used to be, I think M&Ms were made that way before they were kosher. So I can't tell you for sure that you can go ahead and eat anything. I don't know what's in it. I'm not saying you should live paranoid that everyone's trying to put non-kosher things in my candy or my ice cream.
But it's not just the ingredients, Rabbi, right? Isn't it also like what plants it was made on, the equipment?
Oh, so equipment we're going to talk about.
Right.
The equipment we're going to talk about. Because the equipment in your kitchen is no different from the equipment they use there. The fact that they're bigger machines doesn't mean that the rules are different. The rules are the same. So step number 1, chapter 1.
But right, just based on what Jonas said, but if you don't recognize if you're really not capable of discerning what is inside because of it doesn't have any taste. So at that point, according to what we said, you don't care if it's kosher or not. So you can have any crazy ingredients there as long as you cannot really discern the taste.
Then let's distinguish. There are ingredients that are there for flavor. There are ingredients that are there for preservative powers,
Right.
preservative qualities to them. There are ingredients that are there for texture. So gelatin is there for texture. It doesn't have a flavor, it doesn't have a smell, it doesn't preserve anything. It just makes it sticky or chewy or thick. It's a thickening agent. So you can't taste it because it has no taste. It has an effect on what it is that you're eating, but it doesn't make it what it is. That's not true. If you remember last summer we talked about things like cheese.
Correct.
Where if I used enzymes from a non-kosher animal in order to make cheese, then because the cheese, this is the literal conditio sine qua non, without this there is no cheese. So it doesn't matter if it's 1 part per million. It's always going to be asur. Because what I'm tasting, this is a little bit more sophisticated. It's not that I can taste the enzyme, it's that there would be no cheese without it. So anything I taste is thanks to this enzyme. Even the enzyme itself, I can't taste it, I can taste what it did. So it could be a less direct influence than that. But in theory, if you knew someone who made candy out of apples and gelatin, a little bit of sugar, probably you could come to the conclusion that it wouldn't necessarily be asur. There are those who want it to be strict with gelatin or encourage people to use kosher sources, but let's assume it's not necessary for now.
What about chewing gum?
In theory, again, the same thing applies. That's why the rules are so important to learn. If the flavoring compounds are all from kosher sources, even if there's some either preservatives or thickening agents or materials that are added to it for the purpose of giving it a texture or consistency, wouldn't make it asur. You'd have to know what goes into it, though. I couldn't tell you across the board it's okay. I'm just not getting into specific products. The general rule is like this: if you can taste it and it comes from a non-kosher source, it's asur. That's it. That's all we need to know. The concept of 1 out of 60 really was only introduced for situations in which you can't tell. You don't know. So, for example, I had a pot with 60 pieces of kosher meat, and then 1 piece of cheese was thrown into it by a woman named Consuela. So Consuela threw a piece of cheese into my dish, and maybe it's milk that was cooked with meat, maybe it's not. In other words, maybe it's so insignificant that you can't, maybe it's like American cheese that has no taste, or maybe it's like a real European cheese. So I'm inclined to taste it, right? Why am I tasting it? In order to see if I can taste it, right?
Consuela taste.
So if I taste it and it happens to have the taste of cheese in it, regardless of how much is in there, I violated the Isur. I need the concept of 1 out of 60, well, 1 out of 61, in other words, 1 to 60, in order to permit me to taste it. So if I know that I had 2 kilo of meat in this pot, and that she only put in 20 grams of cheese, okay, so maybe I can say here's 1 to 100. I'm allowed to taste it, and then if I taste something non-kosher, like I can taste the cheese and I'd spit it out, fine. If I'm not sure there's 1 out of 60 or 1 to 60 in it, I can't even taste it. Then I have to find someone else to taste it for me. Maybe her name is Consuela. Fine. So these are the general principles that apply to kashrut. You have to be sensitive to what can be tasted. In order for something to be asur, it has to be palpable. You have to be able to taste it, or it has to be some kind of a suspicion that you may be able to taste it. So, go ahead.
Yeah, everything you're saying, is it lechatchila or b'diavad? Meaning, like, can I go and know for a fact that I have a non-kosher piece of meat, and I have 2 kosher pieces of meat, and I put all 3 of them in a pot, saying I'm not going to be able to taste them I'm not going to be able to say the difference when they're going to be cooked, or if it's by mistake, whatever.
Right. So the expression on this, the halachic expression, is en mevatlin isur lechatchila. It is asur to intentionally nullify something that's forbidden. Otherwise, we would have had a great idea, all right? And I already saw the dollar signs in some of your heads. Yeah.
3% of everything.
There you go. I'm going to come up with a halachically creative way to eat pork, that I put 60 pieces of beef in the pot and accidentally knock over a piece of pork in every 60 pieces, have them precisely measured and apportioned, etc.
Yeah, or 51% of my meat is going to come from non-kosher.
Right, exactly. So I can subsidize the kosher meat industry with 49% of non-kosher beef. No. It doesn't work like this. But with some manufacturers it did, but they got caught. So, don't think no one has ever thought of this before, Shlomo. So yes, there is such a suspicion. We do not intentionally nullify that which is asur. It's only b'di'avad. It's only post facto. So I came home and Consuela told me, here's what happened. I said, that's terrible. I'm sorry to hear it. Maybe I don't have to throw the whole thing out. But if she asks me, Rabbi, it's okay if I give you a little, add some gorgonzola to your chol, do a little bit of a spicy kick. I said, no, that's a great idea. In your house, you do whatever you want. In my house, it's asur. So.
What about a piece of chametz? Is it the same?
Same concept. If it was nullified before Pesach, even so, there the chidush is that if I have, give an example of this. If I happen to have jelly, then I use the knife to spread the jelly on the pieces of bread, and there may have been a few crumbs that got in there somehow. But these crumbs are so insignificant they can't be tasted. Using the same knife, I put it in. So they're so insignificant before Pesach that I can use this jar during Pesach. If I can't see the crumbs and I can't taste them, it's okay. It's like a raspberry jelly that you can't even distinguish. So it's not that I intentionally put crumbs in there. Very tricky. I put crumbs in my jelly so that I can eat them on Pesach just to enjoy the fact that I can't taste them. For what? You taste them, it's a sur. You can't taste them, so you don't do this on purpose. But because the crumbs were permitted, it was mutar before Pesach, so I didn't do anything wrong by leaving some crumbs in there. Now, on Pesach, do I have to throw it out? The answer is no. For Sephardi, because it's whole different. For Sephardi, okay. So there were crumbs before Pesach. As long as they're indistinguishable and they're unnoticeable, then I don't have to throw the jelly out in order to consume it on Pesach, because I didn't intentionally nullify the chametz itself, which was an accident, wasn't on purpose, nothing to gain from it, didn't make it any cheaper, taste, better tasting, etc. Fine. Now, we have to appreciate the fact that when it comes to milk and meat, Hazal were careful. Why? The Rashba explains like this. Very simple. Because milk and meat were found in pretty much every home in antiquity, except for the Sephardim who stopped eating milk a long time ago. Don't ask me why. Culinarily, it is what it is. It fell out of favor with them. So, back in the day, when every house did have milk and meat in it, and the kitchens were small, and people only had a small number of utensils, we have a lot more humrot, a lot more strictures than this on our dishes and utensils, silverware, etc. Because it's easy to make mistakes, and because it's not even a function of eating it, it's a sur, milk and meat, it's a sur even to cook them together, even if you're not going to eat it. So if I decided to do what my kids call a science experiment, like they're going to cook coffee with ice cream and salt. Why? It's a science experiment. It's in the name of study. Our house is full of science experiments. So I want to make a science experiment, and I decided to put milk and meat in the same pot and to cook them, just for pure entertainment. And I'm going to throw it out afterwards, no one's going to taste from it. It's a sur for me to do this, even if I'm not going to eat it. So it's a sur to cook them, it's a sur to eat it, even if somebody else cooked it. It's a sur to cook it, even if you're not going to eat it, or someone else is going to eat it. Even for an animal. If I have a dog and I want to cook a little bit of milk, a little bit of meat, it's a sur for me to do. And it's a sur b'hana'ah. I can't even sell it. It's an interesting question that was asked once from Moshe Feinstein. Is it mutar for me to buy stock in a company like McDonald's? So the joke in Kollel was that, yeah, you can, because the meat, it's dilute, it's less than 1 in 60 anyway. Between the additives and preservatives and colors and flavors, and it's kind of like hot dogs, hot dogs with cheese, like what's the big deal? How much meat do you really think is in there? Okay, so the custom is to be strict. If you're going to...
what's the answer for this talk?
So, the dollar signs again, Shlomo? So,
No, it's just interesting.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, the same thing can be asked about Pesach. So his answer was like this. The majority of the company is owned by non-Jews. I have for a company that has 500 million shares of stock, I own a very insignificant proportion of it, and my benefit from it is so indirect that it's not like I'm buying milk and meat and then selling it. I have general shares in the profits. They profit from a lot of things like French fries, etc. But the truth of the matter is, the question is a little bit more general. They're selling non-kosher products. It's asur for me as a Jew to open a non-kosher restaurant. Asur, that's it. It's asur midrabanan. It's asur. Secharo b'dvroha asurim. Someone who makes a living out of selling forbidden things. You have a lot of examples of this. Some of them are better saved for other contexts. But there are certain industries that we're not supposed to be making money from. We're not supposed to be making our parnasah from. But you can if it's indirect or if it's unintentional. An example comes in Mishnah, Masechet Chulin, which Mishnah says it's asur for you as a Jew to sell non-kosher fish. But if you happen to spread a net and you're hoping to catch a certain species of fish and you catch, say, a majority of tuna and you catch some dolphins, it's not asur for you to sell the dolphins because you weren't intending to catch them. That have offended some of the more environmentally inclined. My apologies. Dolphins are animals too. So if what I was aiming for, what I was hoping for, or the majority of what I caught was kosher fish, there happened to be some non-kosher fish in there. I can sell them, as long as this isn't the main goal of my business. And it's based on this concept that every kosher slaughterhouse in the world actually sells more non-kosher meat than they do kosher meat. If it was up to me, I wish all my cows came out Halakhah. If not that, then maybe Betusi. What are you going to do that half of them have problems with their lungs? So if I can't sell the ones that have problems with their lungs, kosher meat would cost, as if it's possible, even more than it already does. The price would be exorbitant. So you bring the cows hoping they're kosher, we do shechita, you check the lungs. The lungs that aren't good, now you can sell it as non-kosher. Not because you want to, because you enjoy this, or you want your business to be in this, but because you're trying to get kosher cows.
But if you had suspicion that the cow was sick or had injury beforehand, then...
You never know. You never know. Until you open it up, you never know. I've seen thousands of animals, you think they were sick and they were healthy, but they were healthy, they were sick. Very hard to tell. You can guess, People with experience, a lot of experience to make those determinations. Anyway, coming back to where we started. Where you have utensils that can be used either for milk or for meat, the language of the Gemara, the Mishnah, is that a pot or a pan that you use to cook milk, you shouldn't use it to cook meat. Use it to cook meat, you shouldn't use it to cook milk. Already, this goes back to Mishnah. We have pots and pans for separate uses. This is in the days before soap, before detergents. Hygiene and sanitation were what they were. You did the best that you could. The suspicion was that both milk and meat, in some places of the world, it hasn't gotten any better. I hear that. I was in Morocco. So, there's a suspicion that there is always going to be some kind of residue, some kind of residual oil or fat left in the pot. This is true of dairy products. They always have fat in them, the good ones anyway. And it's true of meat products as well. So we do not permit the use of a utensil, at least not a metal utensil or a wooden one, or for that matter ceramic or porcelain. We don't permit you to use the ones that you use for milk to be used for meat, and vice versa. We don't switch. Only exception to this is glass. Why? Because the Rashba holds the glass is neutral. It doesn't absorb anything. As long as you can clean it, you can use it for milk or for meat the same day. You can use it for chametz, you can use it for matzah. It doesn't react to anything. Very insightful of him, because the scientists today still prefer glass over any other material in the chemistry labs. It really doesn't react to anything. It's very easy to clean. So we don't use the same utensil for milk or for meat. Understood. Most of us have seen this concept. Today you look in the supermarkets, they all sell stickers, carne y leche, why? For consuela. You can't even find them in English anymore. Meat and milk, what's it going to help? So, what about the oven? Interesting question. I have an oven and I want to bake lasagna, and then I want to use it in order to bake a pot roast. So, the oven itself is not coming into direct contact with it, hopefully not in contact with the food. Sometimes you spill things, it's part of the question. The oven itself is only there to apply heat, and the only thing that's likely to come out of the pot is steam. The pot's going to steam, it's going to release a little bit of water vapor, and it's going to exude, if not a taste, at least a smell. Ever come into the house when things are cooking and you can kind of smell them from a distance? So this has been the case for thousands of years. You have something cooking in a pot or something baking in the oven, and you can pick up the scent, you can pick up the smell from some distance. Is that smell considered a taste or not? Okay, Chazal were sensitive to this concept, because the truth is that most of our sense of taste is related to our sense of smell. Normally, if you smell something, you can get an impression of how it tastes, because the two senses are very related. So the expression in Aramaic, the question as it was asked in the Gemara, Reha milta, is smell something or is it nothing? Like, does it have any significance to it or is it not? It doesn't occupy any space, has no volume, has no mass, it's not quantifiable. What smells more, what smells less. Certain parts of Manhattan smell a lot. There's no way to, happy to drive through them every day. There's no way to to kind of put your finger on it. But it's there. You know that it smells and has a smell. There's a machloket amongst the Amoraim in the Gemara as to whether or not smell is considered something, a contributing factor in Isur, something forbidden. So if I use my oven in order to roast meat, and then I want to use my oven in order to roast something or to bake something dairy like a cheesecake, then if we consider the smell, the vapor exuded by the meat that I had just roasted to be something significant, then in theory the oven now becomes bisari, it becomes carne, as we say in English, and in America. And if this is the case, then I have no business cooking leche. I have no business cooking anything dairy or milk related in the same oven. So this machloket was not resolved in the Gemara, just so you know. And we have an interesting contradiction even in the Shulchan Aruch itself, where he acknowledges there's a machloket. In one place he says, just like this, it's preferable not to use the same oven for milk and meat. At the same time he says it's okay to cook milk and to bake something dairy and something meat inside the same oven if one of them is covered. So at least the smell exuded by the one won't end up in the other. It doesn't have to cover both of them. If you cover one of them, it's enough that the other one's not going to be influenced. It doesn't have to be hermetically sealed, it doesn't have to be a vacuum, but you cover it to the extent feasible, and we assume that it's okay. So at the same time it's okay, and one after the other it's not. Not so clear even the Shulchan Aruch is not so clear what his opinion was. So generally speaking, to go back to Lira, generally speaking, what Rabbi Yosef will do in such a situation is attempt to hold leniently. He will prefer to say that if the Shulchan Aruch wasn't so totally clear on this, as long as the interdiction is midrabanan, again, it's not like I'm cooking milk inside meat or meat inside milk, the vapor, the smell, etc. It's not so clear from the Gemara that it's asur. One opinion says, one opinion says no. And the Rishonim went some this way and some that way in the Middle Ages. So he looks for ways to make it permissible. It's not such an easy thing. We put a stamp on it and it's okay. He looks for ways. Looks for ways to make it permissible. How is this achieved? It's a little bit creative, but I'll give you some of the logic behind it. If you'd like to use the same oven at the same time for milk and meat, as long as one of them is covered, he doesn't dispute the Shulchan Aruch on this. The question is, what's the status of the oven afterwards? And so one of the considerations that Rabbi makes is that, generally speaking, when you put something in the oven, you preheat the oven. In other words, you'll heat it to a certain temperature. The oven, the modern oven, is going to make a beep or it'll ring, and you'll know that it reached the temperature that you set it to. And then you can go ahead and put in your challah, your whatever it is that you're baking. So he says maybe we can consider the preheating of the oven to be some form of hagara or libun, meaning pyrolysis. I used the heat, I applied heat to it. It basically burned whatever was in it previously. So anything left, any remaining residual smell or taste has now been purged, has now been expunged. If that's the case, my oven goes back to being neutral. As long as I waited 24 hours between this one and that one. So if I baked a cheesecake on Thursday morning before I cook for Shabbat on Friday morning, clean the oven, let 24 hours go by, go ahead and preheat it, and you'd be within your rights to use it for the other, either milk or meat, whatever was not done with it in the previous 24 hours. An interesting machloket. I'm just saying you should know that this is the case because there are those who don't hold this way. There are those that would just as soon say, and many of them Ashkenazim, if already it's a machloket, if it's not so clear it's a dispute, why even get involved? So either you buy two ovens or you deal with what you can. In fact, there was even a discussion in Israel, where in Israel the apartments are not necessarily any bigger than they are in America, at least in New York, and they realized that not everybody has room for two ovens, but everybody likes to cook milk and meat, most of us. So they have a lot of these double-decker ovens. They'll have actually the same space. They would have one oven, they would have two, one on top of the other, and part of the same unit. But Mordechai Eliyahu was not especially happy with this concept. He felt that it was still one piece, it was still one utensil. Rabbi Yosef didn't hold this way. He held that as long as they were separate and they had some kind of insulation between them, when the one gets hot, the other one doesn't so much, so it was enough that you could rely on this, and you could use one compartment for dairy, one compartment for meat. And this way you kind of fulfilled the two sides of the argument. You kind of saved yourself from the machloket. Although, as I said, Rabbi does acknowledge that when you're using the oven, again, at the same time, you're within your rights to cover one of the items this way, okay? And by the way, according to the same logic, you can probably cover anything you put into any oven and resolve the problem this way. This is why you'll find sometimes, I can tell you what to do in the YU faculty room, that's these rabbis who teach Torah for a living. They recommend that if you're going to use the microwave, you just put your food inside some kind of a wrapper, plastic bag, a paper bag, a plastic container, whatever it is, and you cook it that way. So regardless of what was cooked in there before, they also have, they still have at least one non-Jewish secretary there. So maybe she came in and cooked ham and things. So as long as what I was cooking was covered, in theory I'm covered too. It wouldn't be that big a deal. But there are those who are more lenient with the microwave than they are with the oven, because the microwave is considered, according to some opinions, it's what's called a bishul b'drabanan. It didn't exist in the time of Chazal. So it's hard to say that cooking milk and meat together in a microwave is a sol minoraita. How would the Torah forbid, first of all, electricity, second of all, microwave energy? This is not so clearly excluded, not in the Torah that I have. Anyway, it's not mentioned. So cooking by microwavable means might not be as bad, and so the severity of the interdiction would be somewhat reduced. So it's easier to do this in a microwave. In other words, not to wait 24 hours would be the catch.
It's easier kashrut microwave also. Just do glass of water for.
Okay, that's how we do today. There are those who didn't agree with that, but again, those who are more lenient about kashrut in the microwave, they say anyway, what's cooked in there is not really considered cooking in the same way that other things are cooked, so maybe it's not such a big deal. It's the logic behind it. Anyway, you had a question?
What about stove? Like the stove itself, why wouldn't you have to wait 24 hours and you can? Now, just to make sure stove doesn't need to be correct?
The stove top.
The stove top, yeah.
Stovetop.
Yes, the only way that that flavor, taste is transferred from one item to the next is with some kind of liquid intermediary. So if I have a pot of pasta with parmigiano, and my pot spills over and touches a pot that had goulash in it, then I would have a problem, because we consider these liquid transfers to be problematic. If I had two items that were dry, generally speaking, the flavor is not so quickly transferred one to the other. So if I have pots that I put on the same stove, it doesn't matter as long as the dishes don't spill over on a regular basis. And then maybe you can say that whatever spills over, it gets burnt right away. It's no longer considered food. It has no flavor to it. Like American restaurants.
What kind of wrapper would suffice for the oven and the microwave?
It doesn't have to be hermetic. It doesn't have to be hermetically sealed.
You have on the airplanes, you have these like double sealed.
Yeah, the concept of double wrapping.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And it's like
very interesting.
industrial strength plastic.
So the double wrapping probably has more to do with the fact that there are non-Jews involved in the cooking than anything else. This comes from Chot Yen Nesech. When it comes to kosher wine, the Gemara says that if you'd like to produce or deal with kosher wine, then if non-Jews are going to be handling it, you should have what's called hotam betoch hotam. It appears everywhere. It's a very common expression in the Kabbalistic literature too. It's like one seal on top of the other. So if all I have is a jar or a bottle that's closed, anybody could open it, take whatever they want, and put something else in. If I have two wrappers, people get lazy. That's it. One wrapper, I can have two wrappers. No, find something else to do. I quit. This Yetzer Hara we have for depression and for despair. It's just this. If I only have to counterfeit one, so I can think of a way I can put the seal, I can make the vacuum thing pop back in. I have to do it twice, I'm not making two steps. That's give up. So if you'd like to produce kosher wine, non-Jews are going to be touching your wine, then you want it to have two covers on it so that non-Jews don't get this Yetzer Hara to worship idolatry and they start pouring wine libations to whatever it is. And this way we trust that even if they are Ovdei Kochavim, they are idolaters, they're not going to be using your wine for their idolatry. For this reason, anywhere that we find something that passes through the hands of a non-Jew, at least when it's meat and wine, we're careful. We have this concept in Halakhah when it comes to meat of basar shenit'alem min ha'ain. Literally, it's meat that we have lost visible contact with. I can no longer see it. I don't know what happened to it. So, if you have, unless you have a very clear and easy system for identifying what came in and what came out of the kitchen, you have a suspicion they might have taken certain pieces, replaced them, whatever. Back in the day, not everything came in a vacuum package. Meat was out, pieces here, pieces there. So having, if you were sending it to someone, they had to have some kind of a siman, some kind of a sign. The Gemara says this. If there was a kosher butcher who was selling kosher meat, how do you know if you sent one of your employees to pick up meat for you that he got meat from the kosher butcher? So the Gemara says you can rely on a certain sign. I do this sometimes in a slaughterhouse. Make 3 scratches or 4, make a letter, make something. So, when you see it, you can identify what is it. Anything they separate, like if they take the liver out of the carcass, I have to know where the kosher livers are. So you can make some kind of shape or a sign or a scratch or cut a certain way, and you can rely on this. Generally speaking, we try to go for 2 wrappers. Unfortunately, as we mentioned before, there were cases in which people falsified the contents of what was supposed to be kosher chicken or kosher meat. Right. Just a little bit less likely to happen when there's 2 packages to falsify or 2 seals to break. It's much less profitable.
Sorry, I went on the tangent, but I still wanted to know what kind of wrapper sufficed for an oven or a microwave.
Right. So you can put it inside a bag, even a paper
Plastic
bag.
bag?
In theory, I wouldn't put a bag in the oven, but you can put it in the microwave. A paper bag or a plastic bag you can put in the microwave.
Foil?
In the oven, yeah. Anything foil with a cover on it, any pot with a cover, Pyrex sometimes.
Steam is still
like
gonna get out.
silicone. Yeah. So in the times of the Gemara, they didn't have hermetically sealed stainless steel and Pyrex. It's okay. The majority of it is covered. They're probably not going to exude flavor one into the other. You're not going to absorb too much of the taste. That was enough for them. We have to assume it's okay.
This concept of going to a non-kosher restaurant, if I don't know, I have to go for work or something, and getting a kosher fish cooked in a wrapper in a non-kosher oven.
If you can find a mashgiach in a non-kosher restaurant, you can ask him to do a favor, and he wraps the fish in 2 pieces of aluminum foil.
But if you ask them...
It's familiar with Sephardi Halakhah, maybe he'll help you.
No, if you ask them to...
No, so what's done commonly in the business world is that if you do go to a non-kosher restaurant, or you end up in a hotel or a convention or a show, a meeting of sorts, very often what they will do is a kosher restaurant or kosher caterer will provide you with something that has, they'll put, for example, they'll take, the easy way to do this is take 2 aluminum pans of the same size, put one inside the other, take 2 coverings of the same size and close them one on top of the other. And that way you would be permitted to cook it in an oven that had non-kosher things cooking in it. That's what's done today. On the airlines, the same thing. You think someone's koshering the oven in United or Air France, they're not. I hate to break your heart, but they're not. So what are they doing? Maybe for Jonas there. I don't know. Okay.
When I come into the plane, I bring
You bring a torch, right?
I wonder why you would stop.
Excuse me, ma'am. This is a religious concept. You just have to you have to accommodate. So this is what they do. This is another reason why the airplane food is wrapped twice. First of all, so nobody should falsify the contents or try to replace them. Second of all, they can cook them in pretty much any oven that they find. If you are traveling from one place to the next, everybody for example, in Brooklyn, speaking of Syrian, all Syrians who go to China, they take food with them. They take this airplane food that's wrapped twice. You can heat it wherever you can find an oven, and you don't have to suspect they put squid and pork and all sorts of things in your dish. So generally speaking, we try to avoid it where possible. If you'd like to rely on Rabbi Avadia's conclusion, again, it's a little bit involved, but he would recommend that you wait 24 hours, that you clean the oven right after you use it. Wait 24 hours from the time that it's clean, like we do on Pesach, basically, because it's the same thing. Chametz, matzah, milk, meat, it's all what you can taste and what you can't. So whatever you can clean, you clean. Whatever you can't is effectively going to be burned by the preheating phase of the oven, or self-clean, whatever. And you'd be within your rights to use it the following day, like you would pretty much anything else.
מה לגבי לאפות משהו ניטרלי באמצע?
לאפות משהו עם?
ניטרלי.
חלה. Yes, so this, if I'm not mistaken, the Rashba comments on this, and he says that...
sorry, if you would translate the question.
Yeah, sorry. So,
not everybody speaks.
It sounds so nice in Hebrew.
Let's think of something neutral in the middle.
I understood the question, right? Not everybody.
It's my motherboard gets very busy when everything I learned was in Hebrew, and you have to translate it at the same time as you're speaking. And the question finally gets something in Hebrew, it's easier. I tell you, this, Simon says this, you have to translate it.
I'll go every week.
She can speak English.
So basically, there's a concern that when you... So here, step by step. We said before that Kol Yisurim B'noten Tam, whatever is asur, or what the Torah forbade you from eating, is only that what has flavor. So it's enough that you can taste it in quantity, or the quality of it is still intact. if it's completely, the taste is ruined, then it's not asur. It might not be ideal, but it's not asur. So if someone were to take pork that's completely putrefied and wanted to commit suicide this way, so you'd be punished for killing yourself, but you would be punished for eating the pork because it's considered not even food anymore. It's something else. So there's a concept that the Gemara mentions that when it comes to utensils, it's a concept what's called the binyumo, or batulah. If you take a metal utensil and you cook in it beef, so we consider the residue, the leftovers, the shamronit, the halachic concept, that's still left on the metal, it still doesn't smell bad for approximately 24 hours. So we use this 24-hour number kind of precisely. If 24 hours have gone by from when you last used it, then we consider that any flavor on it or in it, as long as you don't have like pieces of meat on it, whatever you can clean comes off, and then what's left is no longer considered to be contributing a positive taste. It's what's called pagum. So noten ta'am lifgam. Noten ta'am l'shebach is an ingredient or a residue that contributes a positive flavor. So if you cook meat tastes good, cook it right. So anything else you cook in that pot is going to have this benefit of the positive, good tasting flavor. And after 24 hours, it starts to decompose. So it's no longer considered as something that contributes a positive flavor. Contributes flavor maybe, but a negative one, not a good one. So this is called noten ta'am lifgam. It's something that contributes a flavor, but it's a bad one. It ruins what you cook with. It doesn't contribute in a positive way. So once you've cleared this 24-hour period, generally speaking, we don't rely on this ideally, but it's no longer as big an issue, no longer as big a problem. The problem, as the Rashba identifies it, is that if you cooked something else between the last time you used it for milk or meat and the next time you want to use it for something else, then the something else that you cooked kind of zeroes out the clock. You start again. Why do you start again? Well, you want a simple scientific explanation. Once you cooked it again, you stop the process of decomposition, so it'll just take that much longer for it to happen. So basically, the way we hold is that if you used it for something else, you didn't neutralize the flavor, you just give yourself another 24 hours from then before you can use it for something else. So water, you heat up water for coffee or for tea, you cooked pasta, something, not milk, not meat. The Shulchan Aruch still holds that you wait 24 hours from then because you didn't let an uninterrupted 24 hours go by between the milk and the meat.
Why we have to...
Yes, I'm sorry, okay.
One last thing. I remember specifically you had one of the halakhot that you can use a meat frying pan to fry an egg and then eat the egg with something dairy.
Very good memory. I was thinking about, we're going to get to it tonight, I was going to talk about this next week, but yeah.
So, but you didn't say you have to wait 24 hours or anything like that if it was cooked.
Correct, for a different reason.
Okay.
And that's because it's removed by a few steps. It's the pan and the oil and the egg, and then what you're going to do with it afterwards. It's a different halachic concept. Again, lenient one, not a strict one. So you can be lenient because of this, but we'll probably have to pick this up next week.
Come back next week.
Right.
Yes, episode 2, season 1.
Exactly.
Chazak Malach.
Yishar Koch.
Chazak Malach.